Build mental resilience so that life doesn't put you to the test. There is a moment in life that no one prepares you for. No warning, no signal, no build-up. One day everything feels stable, predictable, under control. You wake up with a sense of direction, a quiet confidence that things are moving the way they should. And then, without asking for permission, something shifts. Pressure appears, uncertainty grows. And suddenly the version of you that felt strong starts to hesitate in ways you did not expect. It is subtle at first, a thought you cannot control, a doubt that lingers longer than it should, a reaction that feels heavier than usual, and then it escalates. Situations intensify, decisions become harder, emotions get louder, and in the middle of all that noise, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to ignore. You are not responding the way you thought you would. Most people carry a quiet belief that when life gets hard, they will rise, that they will become focused, disciplined, composed. That pressure will unlock their best version. But reality does not reward belief. It exposes preparation. Under pressure, you do not become your ideal self. You become your trained self. The version of you that shows up is not built in the moment. It is revealed by it. Every avoided discomfort, every postponed challenge, every moment you chose ease over effort, quietly shaped how you respond when things stop being easy. And here is where it becomes uncomfortable. Mental resilience is not something you can improvise. It is not built in crisis. It is exposed in crisis. When everything feels unstable, what surfaces is not motivation, not inspiration, not intention. What surfaces is conditioning. This is why so many people feel blindsided by life. Not because life is unpredictable, but because they trained themselves only for predictable conditions. They built routines around comfort, not around resistance. They strengthened habits that work when everything is fine, but collapse when everything is not. And when that moment arrives, the one that does not ask for permission, there is no time to negotiate with reality. No time to slowly adapt. No time to figure yourself out. You either have the internal structure to hold your ground or you do not. So the real question is not whether life will test you. That part is inevitable. The real question is far more direct. When that moment arrives, when everything shifts without warning, will you recognize the person you become? Or will you be forced to face a version of yourself that was never prepared to endure what comes next? The moment when life stops. Warning you, there is a dangerous assumption that quietly shapes how people move through life. The belief that before something difficult happens, there will be a sign, a warning, a period of transition that gives you time to prepare, to adjust, to get ready for what is coming. It feels logical, it feels fair, but it is completely disconnected from how reality actually operates. The most defining moments of your life do not announce themselves. They do not give you time to rehearse your response. They arrive without permission, without explanation, and without concern for whether you feel ready. And in that exact instant, something becomes very clear. You are no longer preparing. You are performing. This is where most people get exposed. Not because the situation is impossible, but because their sense of control was always dependent on predictability. As long as things followed a pattern, they felt capable. As long as outcomes seemed manageable, they felt confident. But the moment that pattern breaks, something else breaks with it. Unpredictability is not the problem. Dependence on certainty is. When your mindset requires stability to function, instability feels like collapse. Your thoughts become reactive. Your decisions become delayed. Your emotions begin to dictate your actions. And what you experience in that moment is not the difficulty of the situation itself, but the absence of internal preparation to face it. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Waiting to feel ready is the very thing that ensures you never will be. Because readiness is not a feeling you access when needed. It is a structure you build before the moment demands it. The individuals who remain steady in chaos are not special. They are conditioned. They have trained themselves to operate without perfect information, without reassurance, without the need for things to make sense before they act. They are familiar with uncertainty because they did not spend their lives avoiding it. Now consider this carefully. The moment life stops warning you is the moment it starts measuring you. Not your intentions, not your plans, not your potential. It measures your actual capacity to remain stable when everything around you is unstable. And if that capacity is not there, something automatic takes over. Old patterns, emotional reactions, untrained instincts. You do not choose how to respond in that moment. Your conditioning chooses for you. That is where the real problem begins. Not in the chaos itself, but in the realization that when the moment arrived, you were not in control of who you became inside it. Fragility disguised as comfort. There is a version of weakness that does not feel like weakness at all. It feels like stability. It feels like control. It feels like a life that is finally working. Everything seems organized, predictable, manageable. Your routines are smooth, your environment is familiar, and nothing appears to threaten your balance. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. Comfort has a way of disguising fragility, not by breaking you, but by slowly removing your need to adapt. When nothing challenges you, nothing forces you to grow. When nothing disrupts you, nothing trains you to recover. And without realizing it, you begin to depend on conditions staying favorable in order to function at your best. This is where the shift happens. Your strength becomes conditional. You feel capable, but only within environments that support you. You feel focused, but only when nothing interferes. You feel in control, but only when variables remain predictable. And the longer you stay in that state, the more your mind starts to reject anything that threatens it. Discomfort begins to feel like a problem instead of a signal. Pressure feels abnormal instead of inevitable. Difficulty feels unfair instead of necessary. And this creates a silent vulnerability. Because the moment life introduces something outside of your controlled environment, your system does not recognize it as part of the process. It reacts as if something is wrong. This is why people who seem stable often struggle the most when things go wrong. Not because they are incapable, but because they are unaccustomed. Their resilience was never tested, so it was never built. They developed efficiency, not endurance. And when efficiency is no longer enough, there is nothing underneath to sustain them. Comfort trains you to expect ease, and expectation shapes reaction. When life stops being easy, the gap between what you expected and what is happening creates resistance. That resistance turns into frustration, hesitation, and eventually, collapse under pressure. Now here is what most people do not question. If your current lifestyle requires everything to go right for you to feel in control, then you are not in control. You are dependent. Dependent on circumstances, on timing, on external stability. And dependence is fragile by nature. Real resilience begins when you stop organizing your life around avoiding discomfort and start exposing your mind to controlled instability. Not to suffer, but to adapt. Not to struggle, but to expand your capacity to handle what is coming. Because life will eventually remove the comfort you rely on. And when it does, it will not negotiate with the version of you that only functions when things feel easy. It will reveal whether there is something deeper supporting you, or nothing at all. The silent collapse before the visible fall. There is a moment before everything falls apart that almost no one pays attention to. Not because it is invisible, but because it does not look like a crisis. It looks like hesitation. It feels like mental fatigue. It sounds like quiet excuses that seem reasonable at the time. And that is exactly why it is so dangerous. The breakdown never starts when things go wrong externally. It starts internally, long before any visible consequence appears. It begins in small decisions. Delays, avoidance, subtle shifts in standards. You tell yourself it is temporary, that you will recover later, that this moment does not define you. But what you fail to see is that these moments are not isolated. They are cumulative. Every time you ignore what you know you should do, you weaken something internal. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to matter over time. Your discipline becomes negotiable. Your focus becomes inconsistent. Your tolerance for discomfort begins to shrink. And slowly, without any clear signal, your mental structure starts to erode. This is the silent collapse. No one sees it. There is no external failure yet. From the outside, everything may still look intact, but internally something is shifting. Your reactions become slower. Your thoughts become less precise. Your confidence is no longer grounded. It becomes dependent on things going well. And then the moment arrives. The external challenge, the pressure, the unexpected disruption. And this is where the illusion breaks. Because now, what was happening internally can no longer stay hidden. The cracks that formed in silence are suddenly exposed under pressure. People often think they failed because of the situation, because it was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But the truth is more uncomfortable. The fall did not happen in that moment. That moment only revealed what had already been happening beneath the surface. You do not collapse because life becomes difficult. You collapse because your internal resistance was already compromised before difficulty arrived. And here is the part most people avoid confronting. The signs were always there. The hesitation you ignored. The standards you lowered. The discomfort you avoided. The patterns you justified. None of it was random. It was all pointing in one direction. The problem is that these signals are quiet. They do not force your attention. They allow you to continue, to function, to believe everything is still under control, until suddenly, it is not. Now think about this carefully. If your mental stability can be slowly weakened without you noticing, then rebuilding it requires more than motivation. It requires awareness, precision, intentional correction before the damage becomes visible. Because once the collapse reaches the surface, recovery becomes harder. Not impossible, but heavier, slower, more costly, and that leads to a question most people are not prepared to answer. If the real breakdown is happening in silence right now, without urgency, without pressure, would you even recognize it before it is too late to correct? The illusion of control over the uncontrollable. There is a belief that gives people a false sense of power. The idea that if you plan enough, think enough, organize enough, you can control how life unfolds. It feels intelligent. It feels responsible. It feels like you are staying ahead of problems before they happen. But underneath that belief, there is something else operating. Fear. The need to control everything is not strength. It is a reaction to uncertainty, a way to avoid feeling exposed. Because if everything is mapped, predicted, and structured, then nothing can catch you off guard. At least, that is what it seems. But reality does not respond to your need for control. It ignores it completely. No matter how precise your plans are, there will always be variables you cannot see, cannot predict, and cannot influence. And when those variables appear, they do not ask for permission to disrupt what you built. They simply do. This is where the illusion breaks. Because the more you depend on control, the less prepared you are for anything outside of it. Your mind becomes rigid. Your thinking becomes narrow. You start resisting reality instead of adapting to it. And resistance has a cost. When things do not go as expected, frustration rises. Not because the situation is impossible, but because it violates the structure you were relying on. You begin to waste energy trying to force things back into alignment instead of adjusting your response to what is actually happening. This is what weakens people under pressure. Not the unpredictability itself, but their inability to operate without control. Control creates comfort, but it also creates dependency, and dependency creates fragility. Because the moment control disappears, so does your sense of stability. Now consider the alternative. What if strength is not about controlling outcomes, but about controlling your response regardless of the outcome? What if resilience is not built by eliminating uncertainty, but by becoming functional inside it? This is where a shift needs to happen. Instead of asking how to control everything, you start asking how to remain stable when you cannot control anything. Instead of organizing your life around predictability, you begin training your mind to operate in unpredictability. Because that is where real power exists, not in forcing reality to match your expectations, but in removing your dependence on those expectations entirely. And here is the part most people resist. Letting go of control feels like losing something. But in truth, you are not losing control. You are losing the illusion that you ever had it. What you gain in return is far more valuable. Clarity under pressure, flexibility in chaos, the ability to act without hesitation when things stop making sense. And once you start operating from that place, something changes. Situations that used to overwhelm you no longer carry the same weight. Not because they became easier, but because you became less dependent on them going your way. Now the question becomes unavoidable. If your current stability depends on controlling what happens next, what will remain when control is no longer an option? The invisible resistance you never trained. There is a type of strength that most people believe they have until the moment they actually need it. It is easy to feel mentally strong when nothing is demanding that strength. When decisions are simple, when pressure is low, when consequences are distant. In those conditions, confidence feels natural, stability feels real. But none of that is tested. The problem is not that people are weak. The problem is that they confuse the absence of pressure with the presence of resilience. Real resistance is invisible until it is required. It does not show itself in comfortable environments. It does not develop through routine repetition alone. It is built through exposure to tension, to uncertainty, to situations where your mind wants to escape but you choose to stay. And most people never train that. They train skills. They train knowledge. They train physical performance. But they avoid mental resistance. They avoid situations that challenge their emotional limits. They avoid prolonged discomfort. They avoid anything that forces them to confront their own instability. So when pressure finally arrives, something unexpected happens. Their knowledge is still there. Their abilities are still there. But their capacity to hold themselves together is not. This is where everything starts to break down. Because resistance is not about what you can do when everything is fine. It is about what you can sustain when everything is not. It is about maintaining clarity when your mind is overloaded. It is about making decisions when hesitation feels safer. It is about continuing forward when every instinct is telling you to stop. And that capacity is not built in theory. It is built through repeated exposure to controlled difficulty. Now here is what most people misunderstand. Avoiding discomfort does not protect you. It weakens your threshold. Every time you step away from something that challenges you, you lower your tolerance for future pressure. You make the next challenge feel heavier than it actually is. Over time, this creates a fragile system, one that works efficiently under ideal conditions but collapses when those conditions change. And the most dangerous part is that this fragility is not obvious. You can function, you can perform, you can even succeed. But all of it is built on a foundation that has never been stress tested. Until it is. And when that moment comes, you are not facing the situation alone. You are facing the limits of everything you never trained. So the question is not whether you are capable, it is whether you have prepared your mind to access that capability under pressure. Because if you have not trained resistance, then when life demands it, you will not rise to meet it. You will feel it as something foreign, something overwhelming, something that seems bigger than you, not because it is, but because you never built the capacity to stand inside it. Discomfort as a tool, not a threat. There is a fundamental misunderstanding that shapes how most people respond to difficulty. The belief that discomfort is something to avoid, something that signals danger, something that should be minimized whenever possible. And because of that belief, people spend their lives trying to eliminate friction, reduce effort, and stay within what feels manageable. At first, this seems efficient. It feels like progress. You optimize your environment, remove obstacles, and create a life that flows smoothly. But what you are actually doing is removing the very conditions that build resilience. Discomfort is not the problem. Your relationship with it is. The moment you label discomfort as a threat, your mind shifts into avoidance. You start negotiating with effort. You delay action. You look for alternatives that feel easier, faster, less demanding. And each time you do that, you reinforce a pattern. You teach your mind that discomfort means stop. Over time, this becomes automatic. You do not even question it. The moment something feels difficult, your instinct is to pull back. Not because you consciously choose to, but because your mind has been conditioned to protect you from that sensation. And this is where growth stops. Because everything that expands your capacity exists on the other side of discomfort. Focus under pressure, emotional control, disciplined action, all of it requires you to stay present when things are not easy. Now consider a different approach. What if discomfort is not a signal to stop, but a signal that you are exactly where you need to be? What if it is not something to escape, but something to use? This shift changes everything. Instead of resisting discomfort, you begin to observe it. You recognize it as a natural response, not a command. You allow it to exist without letting it dictate your actions. And in doing that, you start building tolerance. At first, it is unstable. Your mind reacts, your body resists, your thoughts try to pull you away. But if you stay, if you continue despite that internal noise, something begins to change. The intensity decreases, the reaction softens. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. This is how resilience is built. Not by eliminating discomfort, but by increasing your capacity to operate within it. And here is the part most people overlook. Discomfort is predictable. It will always appear when you are doing something that matters. When you are pushing limits, making difficult decisions, stepping into uncertainty. It is part of the process, not an exception to it. So avoiding it does not protect you. It disconnects you from progress. The people who become mentally strong are not those who feel less discomfort. They are the ones who stop being controlled by it. They learn to move with it, to act through it, to use it as feedback instead of a barrier. And once that happens, something shifts permanently. Situations that used to feel overwhelming no longer have the same effect, not because they changed, but because your interpretation of them did. You stop seeing difficulty as something that threatens you and start seeing it as something that sharpens you. Now the question becomes unavoidable. If discomfort is present in everything that builds strength, what happens when you continue treating it like something you should avoid? The internal dialogue that defines your limit. There is a voice that never leaves you. It speaks before you act, while you act, and after you act. Most of the time, you do not question it. You accept it as truth, as logic, as who you are. But that voice is not neutral. It is shaping every limit you believe you have. Your internal dialogue is not just commentary. It is instruction. When pressure rises, that voice becomes louder, more immediate, more influential. It tells you when something is too much, when you should stop, when you are not ready. And if you have never trained it, you do not challenge it. You follow it. This is where most people lose without realizing it. Because the voice feels like awareness, but often it is conditioning. It is built from past experiences, repeated thoughts, and unchallenged beliefs. It reflects what you have practiced mentally, not what is objectively true. So when you face difficulty, you are not just dealing with the situation. You are dealing with a narrative that has already decided how far you can go. This is why two people can face the same challenge and respond completely differently. One interprets pressure as a signal to step forward. The other interprets it as a reason to step back. The difference is not capability. It is internal communication. Now here is what most people misunderstand. You cannot silence that voice. Trying to eliminate it only makes it stronger. But you can train it. You can change how it responds under pressure. Instead of allowing automatic thoughts to dictate your actions, you begin to observe them. You create space between what you hear internally and what you choose to do externally. And in that space, something important happens. You regain control. At first, it feels unnatural. The voice still reacts the same way. It still suggests hesitation, doubt, retreat. But now, you are no longer obligated to obey it. You can move in a different direction even when the voice resists, and that is where limits start to change. Because your limits are not defined by what you feel in the moment. They are defined by what you accept without question. The more you challenge your internal dialogue, the more you expand what is possible for you. Not in theory, but in action. You begin to prove to yourself that the voice is not always accurate. That discomfort does not mean stop. That uncertainty does not mean failure. Over time, the voice adapts. It becomes less reactive, less restrictive. Not because it disappeared, but because it was trained through repeated contradiction. Now consider this carefully. If the voice inside your mind has been shaping your decisions for years without being questioned, how many of your limits are actually real? And more importantly, how many of them are simply the result of a narrative you never chose, but have been following anyway? The construction of an identity that does not break. There is a level of resilience that goes beyond actions, beyond habits, beyond temporary discipline. It is not something you turn on when needed. It is something you become, and once it is established, it changes how you respond to everything. Most people focus on what they do. They try to build better routines, make better decisions, stay consistent for as long as possible, and while that matters, it is unstable if it is not supported by something deeper. Because actions fluctuate, motivation fades, discipline weakens under pressure, identity does not. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will stop when things get hard. If you see yourself as someone who endures, you will continue even when it makes no sense to continue. The difference is not effort, it is self-definition. This is where most people fail to evolve. They attempt to change behavior without changing identity. They want to act like someone resilient, but they still see themselves as someone who struggles under pressure. And when those two things conflict, identity always wins. You do not rise to match what you want to be. You fall back to what you believe you are. So the real shift begins when you stop asking what you should do and start defining who you are. Not based on how you feel, not based on past outcomes, but based on what you decide to reinforce consistently. An identity is not declared once. It is built through repetition, through aligned action, through decisions that confirm it, especially when it is inconvenient. When you act in a way that contradicts your old patterns, you create tension. Your mind resists. It tries to pull you back to what is familiar. But if you persist, if you repeat that new behavior enough times, something begins to stabilize. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop questioning whether you should act. The action becomes automatic because it aligns with who you are. This is what creates unbreakable resilience. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of internal conflict when facing it. When your identity is rooted in endurance, pressure does not feel like an interruption. It feels like a condition you are built to operate in. You do not need to convince yourself to stay focused. You do not need to force discipline. You simply act in accordance with what you have already accepted as your standard. And here is the part most people underestimate. Once identity is established, it simplifies everything. Decisions become clearer. Reactions become faster. Doubt loses influence because it no longer aligns with how you see yourself. Now ask yourself this. When pressure rises, are you trying to act strong, or are you someone who does not break? Because one of those requires constant effort. The other requires consistency with who you have already become. The invisible preparation. No one sees. There is a part of resilience that will never be recognized by anyone else. No applause, no validation, no external proof that it is even happening. From the outside, it looks like nothing, but internally, it is everything. Most people are conditioned to respond to what is visible: results, achievements, moments of performance. They focus on what can be measured, what can be shown, what can be acknowledged. But resilience is not built in those moments. It is built in the ones no one is watching. It is built when you choose discipline without pressure, when you act with intention without urgency, when you hold yourself to a standard that no one else is enforcing. This is where the real separation happens. Because when effort is tied to visibility, consistency becomes unstable. You perform when it matters, but you relax when it does not. You push when there is something at stake, but you drift when there is not. And over time, this creates a gap between who you are capable of being and who you actually are when no one is expecting anything from you. That gap is where resilience breaks. Invisible preparation closes that gap. It is the ability to maintain structure without external demand, to repeat actions that do not give immediate results, to stay aligned with your standards even when there is no consequence for not doing so. At first, it feels unnecessary, even pointless, because there is no reward attached to it, no recognition, no immediate outcome. But what you are building in those moments is not visible progress, it is internal stability. You are reinforcing patterns that will not collapse under pressure. And this is where it becomes powerful. Because when the moment arrives, the one that demands everything from you, you are not relying on motivation. You are not trying to rise to the occasion. You are simply executing what you have already repeated enough times for it to be natural. The situation may be new. The pressure may be higher. But your response is familiar. That is what preparation does. It removes hesitation. It reduces emotional interference. It allows you to act without needing to think about whether you are capable. Now consider the opposite. If most of your effort only exists when it is required, then under pressure, you are trying to perform and build at the same time. You are trying to be stable while learning how to be stable. And that is where inconsistency takes over. Because what is not practiced in silence cannot be relied on in chaos. This is why the strongest individuals are often the least visible in their preparation. They are not waiting for the right moment to act. They are preparing in moments that do not seem to matter, so that when the moment does matter, nothing feels unfamiliar. And here is the question that defines everything. Who are you when nothing is expected from you? Because that version of you is the one that will show up when everything is. When life tests you, it will be too late to start. There is a point where preparation is no longer an option. No more time to think. No more space to adjust. No more chance to build what should have already been built. The moment arrives, and whatever exists inside you at that exact time is what you have to work with. Life does not pause to let you catch up. When pressure hits, it does not ask if you are ready. It does not slow down so you can organize your thoughts. It does not give you a second version of the same moment so you can respond better. It presents the situation once, and your response is immediate. This is where everything becomes clear. All the ideas you agreed with but never applied, all the standards you set but did not maintain, all the moments you chose comfort instead of resistance, they all converge into one reality. You either have the structure to hold yourself together, or you do not. And this is what most people misunderstand. Resilience is not built when life becomes difficult. It is revealed when life removes your ability to prepare. At that point, there is no negotiation, no adjustment period, only execution. If your mind is not trained to handle uncertainty, it will default to confusion. If you are not used to discomfort, you will try to escape it. If your identity is not grounded, you will hesitate. Not because you want to, but because that is what your conditioning dictates. And conditioning does not change in real time. That is why waiting is so dangerous. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for clarity before you act. Because the moment that demands everything from you will not align with your timeline. It will come when it comes. And when it does, the version of you that shows up will not be based on what you intended to become. It will be based on what you consistently practiced. This is where the decision becomes unavoidable. Either you build your mind before the test, or the test will define your limits for you. There is no middle ground, because in the end, life does not break people randomly. It exposes what was never strengthened. And once that exposure happens, you do not get to choose whether you are tested. You only get to face the result of who you already are when the test begins.